I am Amanda, 35 years old, and I never thought my mother-in-law Eleanor would break my daughter Zoe's heart so completely. When Eleanor moved into our Portland home 2 years ago, I tried to welcome her with open arms despite her subtle jabs. But at the joint 13th birthday celebration for Zoe and her cousins, Eleanor revealed her true feelings with a single devastating sentence that left my daughter in tears. A sentence that finally pushed me to make the hardest decision for our family's well-being. Before I continue the story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments and hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more about standing up for your family. My husband James and I have been married for 15 years. We met in college, fell in love quickly, and built our life together in Portland, Oregon. James is 37, a dedicated high school science teacher who spends extra hours helping students who struggle with difficult concepts. He is patient, kind, and usually the peacemaker in any conflict. Our daughter Zoe is 13, a creative soul who loses herself in sketchbooks and writes stories that make me tear up with pride. Her teachers consistently praise her imagination and artistic talents. Zoe has always been sensitive, taking criticism to heart. But she also possesses a quiet strength that reminds me of myself at her age. James grew up as an only child until his father remarried when James was 12. That marriage brought a half-brother, Thomas, into the picture. Though they grew up in separate households, James and Thomas maintained a decent relationship over the years. Thomas is now married to Heather, and they have 14-year-old twins, Lucas and Ava. The twins attend a private school across town and are involved in numerous extracurricular activities that Thomas and Heather proudly share on social media. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, became a widow 3 years ago when James' father passed away from a heart attack. After selling her house to pay off medical debts, she claimed financial difficulties and needed a place to stay. James immediately offered our home, and though I had reservations, I agreed. Family helps family, right? We renovated our guest room with fresh paint, new curtains, and comfortable furniture to make Eleanor feel welcome. We adjusted our routines, our dinner menus, and even our weekend plans to accommodate her. Our home is a modest 2-story suburban house with 4 bedrooms, a spacious backyard, and a converted garage that serves as my office. I work as a part-time graphic designer, taking freelance projects that allow me to be home when Zoe returns from school. It is not a mansion by any means, but we have made it comfortable and filled it with love. The first warning signs of Eleanor's favoritism appeared within months of her arrival. When Thomas brought the twins over for Sunday dinners, Eleanor would save special treats for Lucas and Ava, but conveniently forget to include Zoe. She remembered every detail about the twins' school events, but would claim forgetfulness when Zoe mentioned her upcoming art show or writing competition. These were small things easily dismissed, but they formed a pattern that grew increasingly difficult to ignore. Zoe tried so hard to connect with her grandmother. She would bring her artwork to show Eleanor, hoping for praise or simply acknowledgement. "Grandma, look what I painted in art class today," she would say, holding out a watercolor landscape that showed remarkable talent for her age. Eleanor would glance up from her phone, murmur something like, "That is nice, dear," and return to scrolling. But when Lucas showed her his science fair project or Ava mentioned her dance recital, Eleanor's face would light up with genuine interest. "Tell me everything," she would say, giving them her full attention. I tried addressing the issue subtly with James several times. "Have you noticed how your mother treats the kids differently?" I would ask after Eleanor had retired to her room for the evening. James would sigh and run his hand through his hair. "Mom is still adjusting to living with us. She will come around eventually," he would say. "Or you are reading too much into things. Mom just connects more easily with the twins because they are into sports like Dad was." I would let it drop, not wanting to create tension, but the knot in my stomach grew tighter with each dismissal. Financially, we were comfortable but careful with our money. James' teaching salary and my freelance work provided enough for our needs, but after helping Eleanor move in and covering some of her ongoing expenses, our savings had taken a hit. We were not struggling, but extravagant purchases required planning and budgeting. Eleanor contributed minimally to household expenses, claiming her Social Security barely covered her personal needs and medications. We never asked to see her financial statements, taking her word out of respect. Thomas and Heather, on the other hand, both worked high-paying corporate jobs. They lived in an exclusive neighborhood, took luxury vacations, and rarely hesitated to buy the latest gadgets or designer clothes for the twins. I never begrudged them their success, but I sometimes noticed Eleanor making comparisons that left Zoe feeling inadequate. "Lucas and Ava are going to Europe this summer," she would announce at dinner. "Is not it wonderful that Thomas can provide such cultural experiences for his children?" The implication that we were somehow failing Zoe by not matching these opportunities hung in the air, unspoken but palpable. Despite these undercurrents of tension, we maintained regular family gatherings, monthly dinners, holiday celebrations, and casual weekend visits kept the extended family connected. Thomas and Heather were pleasant enough, if somewhat preoccupied with their own achievements, and the twins were typical teenagers absorbed in their phones and friend dramas. Zoe often felt overshadowed in these gatherings, but would find quiet corners to sketch or read occasionally, trying to engage her cousins in conversation with mixed success. As Eleanor's stay extended from months into years, the dynamic became our new normal. I learned to shield Zoe from the most hurtful comparisons. James continued to make excuses for his mother's behavior, and Eleanor settled comfortably into her role as the matriarch who subtly dictated the emotional temperature of our home. The delicate balance we maintained was precarious, but I believed we could manage it for James's sake. And out of respect for family bonds, I had no idea that a single birthday celebration would shatter that balance completely and force us all to confront the truth we had been avoiding. By coincidence, Zoe and the twins all had birthdays within the same month. Zoe's fell on the 10th, Lucas and Ava's on the 25th. For years, we had celebrated separately, but this year, with all three kids turning 13, Eleanor suggested a joint party. "It would be so much more efficient," she said one evening as we cleared the dinner table. "And the children are entering their teenage years. It should be special." James thought it was a great idea, and even I had to admit the practical benefits. One venue, one cake order, one set of decorations, and everyone in the family could attend without juggling multiple weekends. I took charge of the planning, booking the community center near our house for the Saturday between the actual birthdays. I ordered a custom 3-tier cake with different flavors to suit each child's preference. Chocolate for Zoe, vanilla for Lucas, and red velvet for Ava. I designed and sent digital invitations to family, friends, and classmates. I even created a shared online document where we could all contribute ideas for activities and food. Thomas and Heather agreed to handle the beverages and photography, while James volunteered to manage the games and music. Zoe was especially excited about finally becoming a real teenager. She had been waiting for this milestone, talking about it for months. "Mom, when I turn 13, can I redecorate my room?" "Nothing childish anymore," she asked one morning while getting ready for school. I agreed, and we spent evenings looking at paint samples and browsing online for affordable furniture that would transform her space from child to teen. She had also mentioned needing a new phone, as her old one was barely functioning with a cracked screen and battery that died by lunchtime. It was not a frivolous request, but something she genuinely needed for school projects and staying connected with friends. 2 weeks before the party, I took Eleanor shopping for decorations. We were comparing prices on streamers and balloons when she suddenly checked her watch and said, "I need to run a quick errand. I will meet you at the food court in an hour." I thought nothing of it until later that afternoon when I overheard her on the phone with Thomas. "Yes, I got them both. The newest model, just as we discussed. They are going to be so surprised," she said in a hushed tone that immediately piqued my curiosity. When she noticed me in the doorway, she quickly ended the call. "Just finalizing some birthday details with Thomas," she explained with a dismissive wave. That evening, during our family dinner, Zoe shared her birthday wish list. "I would really love some new art supplies, especially those professional colored pencils we saw at the art store, and maybe some books." And she hesitated before adding, "I know it is expensive, but my phone is really dying. Even a basic new one would be amazing." She looked hopefully around the table, especially at her grandmother. Eleanor barely glanced up from her plate. "Art supplies. "How nice," she said flatly. But minutes later, when James mentioned the twins' upcoming birthday, she perked up immediately. What are Lucas and Ava hoping for this year? Are they still into those video games? Or perhaps something more grown up now that they are turning 13? The enthusiasm in her voice was unmistakable, and I saw Zoe's face fall slightly before she masked her disappointment. James had been working extra summer school sessions specifically to afford good gifts for Zoe. "I want to get her that phone," he told me late one night after Zoe had gone to bed. "She deserves it, and she really needs it for school." I agreed, though I worried about the expense. We had been setting aside a little each month, and with the extra summer school money, we could manage it, though it would be a stretch. Around this time, I had coffee with my friend Rachel, who listened patiently as I vented about the situation with Eleanor. "It is like she does not see Zoe at all," I confided. "Or worse, she sees her, but has decided she is somehow less worthy of attention than the twins." Rachel, who had gone through similar issues with her own in-laws, suggested I start documenting the behavior, not to create drama, she clarified, but to have concrete examples. "When you talk to James, sometimes people do not see patterns until you lay them out clearly." The weekend before the party, Zoe and I spent a morning baking cookies for her class. As we mixed ingredients, she confided in me. "Do you think Grandma will like the thank you card I made her?" I spent extra time on the details. The hopeful look in her eyes broke my heart. Despite years of subtle rejection, she was still trying to win Eleanor's approval. "It is beautiful, honey. Anyone would be lucky to receive such a thoughtful card," I said, carefully avoiding a direct promise about Eleanor's reaction. Meanwhile, Eleanor had become increasingly secretive, receiving packages that she quickly spirited away to her room. When questioned, she would say they were personal items or just some things Thomas asked me to keep for him. She began taking private phone calls in her room or outside on the porch, always ending them abruptly if anyone approached. Her behavior struck me as odd, but with the party planning consuming most of my attention, I did not press the issue. At dinner the night before the party, Eleanor dominated the conversation with stories about the twins. Lucas made the varsity soccer team as a freshman. Can you believe it? And Ava's dance instructor says she could try out for that prestigious summer program in New York. On and on she went, barely acknowledging Zoe's quiet mention of her own recent achievement, being selected to display artwork in the school lobby. I noticed Zoe pushing food around her plate. Her appetite diminished, but when I caught her eye, she forced a smile. I wanted to redirect the conversation to create space for Zoe to share her news, but Eleanor steamrolled every attempt. The day before the party was a flurry of activity. James and I took the afternoon off to decorate the community center. Zoe came straight from school to help carefully arranging the photo display I had created, showing all 3 children growing up through the years. Eleanor arrived late carrying several shopping bags that she deposited in a back room without explanation. "Just some last-minute surprises," she said when I inquired. Thomas and Heather dropped by briefly to check the setup. The twins trailing behind them, eyes glued to their phones, except when Eleanor called them over for hugs and exclamations over how tall they had grown. As we drove home that evening, exhausted but satisfied with our preparations, Zoe gazed out the window with a dreamy expression. "Tomorrow is going to be the best day ever," she said with such innocent expectation that I reached over and squeezed her hand. If only I had known what Eleanor had planned, perhaps I could have prepared Zoe or prevented the heartbreak that was coming. But in that moment, I shared my daughter's optimism and looked forward to celebrating this milestone with family and friends who loved her. The morning of the party dawned bright and clear, a perfect September Saturday. Zoe was up early, too excited to sleep. She had carefully selected her outfit the night before. A new teal dress that brought out the blue in her eyes, silver Converse sneakers, and the silver heart necklace James and I had given her on her actual birthday earlier that week. She spent extra time on her hair trying a new braided style she had learned from a video tutorial. "How do I look, Mom?" she asked, twirling in front of me. "Absolutely beautiful," I answered truthfully. "Every bit the teenager now." We arrived at the community center an hour before guests were due to arrive. James immediately began setting up the sound system while Zoe and I put final touches on the decorations. We had transformed the playroom into a festive space with blue, purple, and silver balloons, twinkling fairy lights, and 3 large poster boards displaying photos of each birthday child. A long table held wrapped presents from our immediate family waiting for the gift opening ceremony. Later, Thomas and Heather arrived with the twins precisely at 2 o'clock. Lucas and Ava were dressed in coordinating outfits that I suspected cost more than our entire party budget. Eleanor fussed over them, immediately straightening Lucas's collar and complimenting Ava's designer shoes. Zoe approached with a shy smile, clearly hoping for similar attention, but Eleanor merely nodded in her direction before turning back to the twins. I saw the hurt flash across Zoe's face before she composed herself and went to greet her cousins. Soon, the community center was filled with the sounds of teenage laughter and conversation. We had invited classmates of all 3 children, neighbors, and extended family members totaling about 40 people. The activities James had planned were a hit: a photo booth with silly props, a karaoke station, and several game areas where teens gathered in shifting groups. Zoe flitted between friend clusters, her initial nervousness giving way to genuine enjoyment. I caught James's eye across the room, and we shared a smile of relief. Despite the underlying tension with Eleanor, the party was going well. The food table offered a variety of teen-friendly options: mini sliders, a build-your-own nacho bar, fruit skewers, and an assortment of finger desserts in addition to the cake. Eleanor had insisted on bringing her famous delied eggs, though I knew none of the kids would touch them. Sure enough, the eggs remained untouched while the other foods disappeared rapidly. At 4:30, it was time for the cake ceremony. The 3-tier creation was wheeled out, 13 candles on each level glowing warmly. The crowd gathered around, phones raised to capture the moment. Zoe, Lucas, and Ava stood side by side behind the cake. Zoe in the middle, since it was her actual birthday closest to the party date. "Make a wish," I encouraged as everyone finished singing. The 3 teens exchanged glances, took deep breaths, and blew out their candles in unison. Applause and cheers erupted as James began cutting and distributing cake slices. After cake came the moment many had been waiting for: opening presents. We had set up 3 chairs at the front of the room, and the teens took their seats as guests gathered around. They began with gifts from friends and extended family, taking turns opening packages containing books, gift cards, clothing, and trinkets. Zoe received a beautiful sketchbook from her best friend, Lily, art supplies from several classmates, and books from our neighbors. She thanked each giver with genuine gratitude, her pile of unwrapped gifts growing steadily beside her. When most of the presents had been opened, Eleanor suddenly stood up and cleared her throat. "I have something special for the birthday children," she announced loudly, drawing all attention to herself. She disappeared into the back room and returned carrying 2 identically wrapped boxes with elaborate gold bows. The boxes were the perfect size for phones, and my stomach tightened with apprehension. "For my darling grandchildren on this special birthday," Eleanor proclaimed, handing the packages to Lucas and Ava with flourish. The twins tore into the wrapping paper eagerly, and identical gasps escaped them as they revealed brand new iPhone 16 Pro Max phones, the latest model that had been released just weeks earlier. These were not basic phones, but the top-tier version with the largest storage capacity, easily costing over $1,000 each. "Grandma, no way," Lucas exclaimed, jumping up to hug Eleanor. "This is amazing." "Thank you so much," Ava squealed, also embracing her grandmother. Eleanor beamed with pleasure at their reaction, accepting their thanks with obvious pride. "Only the best for my grandchildren," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The room had grown quieter as people realized the extravagance of the gifts. All eyes turned to Zoe, who was sitting very still in her chair, hands folded in her lap. Her expression held confused expectation as she waited for her grandmother to produce a 3rd package. After all, there were 3 birthday celebrants. Grandma Zoe finally said, her voice small but carrying in the hushed room. "Did you get something for me too?" Eleanor turned to Zoe, and the look on her face made my blood run cold. It was not apologetic or embarrassed. It was dismissive, almost annoyed at being questioned. "That is all I have," she said flatly. "I only got gifts for my real grandchildren." The silence that followed was absolute. 40 people collectively held their breath, unable to believe what they had just heard. Zoe's face crumpled in confusion. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. Eleanor shrugged the gesture, casual and cruel. "You are not really part of the family, dear. Not by blood, anyway." It took me a moment to process her words. Not by blood. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Eleanor was referring to the fact that Zoe was adopted, something we had never hidden, but also never treated as making her any less our daughter. We had adopted her as an infant after years of fertility struggles, and she had been our beloved child from the moment she was placed in our arms. The fact that Eleanor would use this to exclude Zoe was beyond comprehension. Tears welled in Zoe's eyes and spilled down her cheeks. She stood up so quickly her chair tipped over backward, the crash startling in the stunned silence. Then she ran from the room, shoulders shaking with sobs. I immediately followed, pausing only long enough to shoot Eleanor a look that promised this was far from over. I found Zoe in the women's bathroom, huddled in the corner, knees drawn to her chest. Her carefully applied makeup was strewn with tears. Her earlier joy completely extinguished. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, kneeling beside her and pulling her into my arms. She collapsed against me, her body heaving with sobs. "Why does she hate me, Mom?" "Mom," she choked out between breaths. "What did I ever do to her?" "Nothing, baby." "You did nothing wrong," I assured her, stroking her hair. "Grandma is the one with the problem, not you. You are our daughter in every way that matters." After several minutes of holding her while she cried, I helped Zoe clean her face and fix her hair. "We can leave right now if you want," I offered. "Or we can go back out there and show Grandma that her words cannot hurt you." It was unfair to ask a 13-year-old to be so strong, but I wanted to give her the choice. Zoe took a deep, shuddering breath. "I want to go home," she whispered. "But I should say goodbye to my friends first." When we returned to the main room, the atmosphere had completely changed. James was standing toe-to-toe with his mother, his face flushed with anger. I had rarely seen my husband truly angry, but there was no mistaking his fury now. "How could you say that to her?" He was demanding. "How could you be so cruel to a child, any child, let alone my daughter?" Eleanor stood with arms crossed, unrepentant. "I simply spoke the truth, James. The girl is adopted. She is not a blood relative. Lucas and Ava are my actual grandchildren." Thomas and Heather hovered nearby, clearly uncomfortable. The twins were showing off their new phones to friends, either oblivious to or intentionally ignoring the drama unfolding. Most of the other guests were gathering their belongings, eager to escape the tension. The party was effectively over. I guided Zoe around the edge of the room, helping her collect her gifts and say quick goodbyes to her closest friends. Lily, bless her heart, gave Zoe a fierce hug and whispered something that made Zoe give a watery smile. Other friends expressed support through touches on the arm or sympathetic glances. The drive home was filled with tense silence. Eleanor had come with us to the party, but Thomas offered to drive her back to our house later, clearly wanting to remove her from the immediate situation. James white-knuckled the steering wheel the entire way, occasionally glancing in the rear-view mirror at Zoe, who stared out the window emotionally exhausted. As we pulled into our driveway, I reached over and placed my hand on James's arm. "We need to talk about what happens next," I said quietly. He nodded, his expression grim. We both knew that everything had changed, and there was no going back to pretending all was well. Eleanor had shown her true colors in the cruelest possible way, and now we had to deal with the fallout. That evening, Zoe retreated to her room immediately after we arrived home, locking the door behind her. Despite my gentle knocking and offers of comfort food, she remained sequestered, only texting that she wanted to be alone. I respected her need for space while keeping an ear out for sounds of distress. James and I withdrew to our bedroom for a heated discussion about his mother. "I cannot believe she would say something so heartless," I said, pacing the floor while James sat on the edge of our bed, head in his hands. "Actually, I can believe it. The signs have been there all along, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined." "She is getting older," James said weakly. "Maybe she did not mean it the way it sounded." I stopped pacing and stared at him incredulously. Are you serious right now? I only got gifts for my real grandchildren. You are not really part of the family. How exactly was she not meaning that the way it sounded? James, please enlighten me. He sighed deeply, shoulders slumping. I know. I know. It was inexcusable. She is my mother, Amanda. I have never seen her act like this before. Really? Never. I challenged him. What about last Christmas, when she gave the twins those expensive gaming systems and got Zoe a $5 journal from the dollar store? Or when she drove 2 hours to watch Lucas's baseball tournament, but claimed she was too tired to attend Zoe's art show that was 10 minutes away? Or how about all the times she has forgotten Zoe's food preferences, but remembers the twins' favorite snacks in detail? This has been happening for years, James. The only difference is that today she said the quiet part out loud. James was silent for a long moment, processing my words. I guess I did not want to see it. He finally admitted it was easier to make excuses than to admit my mother could be so prejudiced. Around 11 o'clock, I heard soft crying from Zoe's room and knocked gently on her door. Sweetheart, can I come in? After a moment, the lock clicked, and I entered to find her curled up on her bed, clutching the stuffed rabbit she had long ago claimed was too babyish, but never quite got rid of. I sat beside her and stroked her hair, waiting for her to speak. Why does not Grandma love me, Mom? She finally asked the question, piercing my heart. Is it because I am not really yours? Listen to me, I said firmly, tilting her chin up to meet my eyes. You are really ours in every way that matters. Biology does not make a family. Love does. Grandma is wrong. Completely wrong. Her inability to see that says everything about her and nothing about you. Zoe nodded, but I could tell my words, though appreciated, could not fully heal the wound Eleanor had inflicted. We talked until she fell asleep exhausted from the emotional day. I tucked the blanket around her and kissed her forehead before quietly leaving the room. The next morning, Eleanor acted as if nothing unusual had happened. She came downstairs for breakfast, complained that the coffee was too strong, and asked what was planned for the day, as if the previous day's party had been a complete success. James and I exchanged glances over our mugs, silently, communicating that a confrontation was inevitable. Mom James began setting down his coffee. We need to talk about what you said to Zoe yesterday. Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. Oh, is she still upset about that? Children are so sensitive these days. In my time, we learned to toughen up. You told my daughter she was not part of the family, James said, his voice low but intense. You deliberately excluded her while lavishing expensive gifts on her cousins. How exactly should she have toughened up about that? Eleanor sighed dramatically. I am sorry if feelings were hurt. That was not my intention. But facts are facts, James. The girl is adopted. Lucas and Ava are my blood relatives. Her name is Zoe, I interjected, unable to contain myself. Not the girl Zoe. And she has been our daughter since she was 3 days old. Eleanor pursed her lips, but said nothing further, and the conversation ended in a stalemate when Zoe came downstairs puffy from crying. Eleanor barely acknowledged her busying herself with the newspaper, while Zoe silently ate a small bowl of cereal. Later that day, while doing laundry, I found a receipt in the pocket of Eleanor's slacks. It was from an electronics store showing the purchase of 2 iPhone 16 Pro Max phones totaling over $2,500. The date on the receipt was 2 weeks earlier, confirming that this had been a premeditated decision, not a last-minute impulse. The discovery hit me like a punch to the gut. Eleanor had planned to exclude Zoe all along to publicly humiliate my child on her birthday. Even more disturbing was the realization that Eleanor clearly had substantial savings despite claiming financial hardship as the reason for moving in with us. $2,500 for phones was not a small expense for someone supposedly struggling to make ends meet. How many other lies had she told us? Over the next few days, Zoe withdrew from family activities. She took meals in her room claiming homework needs and avoided the living room when Eleanor was present. She stopped sharing her artwork and fell silent during dinner on the rare occasions she joined us at the table. The vibrant creative child who filled our home with stories and laughter had retreated into herself. On Wednesday, I received a call from Zoe's school counselor. Mrs. Walker, I wanted to touch base about Zoe. She has been unusually quiet in class, and her English teacher mentioned she has not been turning in assignments, which is very unlike her. Did something happen that we should be aware of? The call confirmed what I already knew. The damage Eleanor had inflicted went beyond hurt feelings. It was affecting Zoe's academics, her social interactions, her entire sense of self. My anger, which had been simmering just below the surface, began to boil. That evening, I confronted Eleanor directly about the receipt. You spent over $2,000 on phones for the twins, but could not get anything for Zoe. And all this time, you have claimed you can barely afford your medications. Eleanor's face hardened. My money is my business, Amanda. I can spend it how I choose, and I choose to spend it on my actual grandchildren. While living rent-free in our home, I pointed out eating food we buy, using utilities we pay for. James invited me to live here, she countered. If you have a problem with that arrangement, perhaps you should discuss it with your husband. James, who had been increasingly quiet as he processed his mother's true nature, was starting to see the situation more clearly. That night, he admitted, I think Mom has been manipulating us, using her supposed financial problems to gain sympathy while hoarding her money for things she actually wants to spend on, like spoiling the twins. The tension in our household grew thicker by the day. Ella Laner began making pointed comments about my parenting, my cooking, even my appearance. No wonder Zoe is so sensitive with you coddling her constantly, she remarked during dinner. Or perhaps if you spent more time teaching Zoe proper manners instead of encouraging all that art nonsense, she would fit in better with proper society. The final straw came 1 week after the party. Zoe had reluctantly joined us for dinner, pushing food around her plate, while Eleanor dominated the conversation with news about Thomas's recent promotion. When Zoe politely asked to be excused, Eleanor scoffed, running away again. You are too sensitive, just like your mother. It is no wonder you struggle to be accepted. Zoe's eyes filled with tears as she fled the table. James immediately stood up, napkin thrown down. That is enough, Mom. You have gone too far. Eleanor looked genuinely surprised at his reaction. I was merely making an observation. The girl needs to develop a thicker skin if she is going to survive in this world. As James followed Zoe upstairs to comfort her, I remained at the table staring at my mother-in-law. A calm clarity descended over me. This woman was toxic, and she was poisoning our home, our family, and most importantly, my child's sense of self-worth. Something had to change, and it needed to happen immediately. That night, I could not sleep. I lay awake beside James, my mind racing through options and scenarios. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, I slipped out of bed and went downstairs to the kitchen, opening my laptop at the table. I spent hours researching emotional abuse, family boundaries, and the impact of toxic relationships on children's development. Everything I read confirmed what my heart already knew. Allowing Eleanor to continue undermining Zoe's sense of belonging would cause long-term damage to my daughter's emotional well-being. When James came downstairs at 6:30, he found me still at the kitchen table, multiple browser tabs open and notes scribbled on a legal pad. You have been up all night, he observed, concern etching his features. James, we need to talk about your mother, I said directly. This situation is not sustainable. The impact on Zoe is too severe. He nodded slowly, pouring himself coffee before joining me at the table. I know. I have been thinking about it too. What she said at the party and then again last night. It is inexcusable. It is more than that. I pointed out this is a pattern of behavior that has been escalating for years. The party incident was just the most public and blatant example. If we do not act now, Zoe will internalize the message that she is somehow less worthy of love and belonging because she is adopted. James closed his eyes briefly, pain crossing his face. What do you suggest we do? Your mother needs to leave our home, I said firmly. I know she is your mother, and I know this is difficult, but our primary responsibility is to our daughter. To my relief, James did not argue. You are right, he admitted. I have been torn between loyalty to my mother and protecting Zoe. But seeing how much this is hurting our daughter, there is really no choice. Zoe has to come first. We spent the next hour outlining a plan. James would go to work as usual, not wanting to alert Eleanor to the coming confrontation. I would call in sick to my freelance job, explaining to my client that a family emergency had arisen. After Zoe left for school, I would have the necessary conversation with Eleanor. Before implementing our plan, I called my own mother for advice and support. Mom had always been a voice of reason in difficult situations, and today was no exception. "You are doing the right thing, Amanda," she assured me. "No child should feel unwelcome in their own home, especially by a grandparent who should be a source of unconditional love. Be firm but calm. This is about Zoe's well-being, not about punishing Eleanor, though God knows the woman deserves it." After ending the call, I waited until Eleanor left for her weekly grocery shopping trip. The temporary reprieve from her presence allowed me to gather my thoughts and prepare mentally for the confrontation ahead. I reflected on my own childhood experiences with my maternal grandmother, a critical woman who had made me feel constantly inadequate. I had vowed never to let Zoe experience that kind of emotional manipulation. Yet, here we were with history repeating itself in my own home. At 11 o'clock, Eleanor returned with several shopping bags. I helped her unload groceries, making casual conversation about the weather and local news. Once everything was put away, I suggested we sit down with coffee. "There is something important we need to discuss," I said, keeping my tone neutral. Eleanor followed me to the kitchen table, an expression of mild curiosity on her face. I placed a mug of coffee in front of her, exactly as she liked it, with 1 sugar and a splash of cream. I took a seat across from her, hands wrapped around my own mug to stop them from shaking. "Eleanor," I began calmly, "I want to talk about what happened at the birthday party and the comments you have been making to Zoe." She rolled her eyes slightly. "Are we still on that?" "I thought we had moved past it." "No, we have not moved past it," I said firmly. "What you said deeply hurt Zoe. Telling her she is not part of the family because she is adopted was cruel and untrue." "I merely stated a fact," Eleanor replied, sipping her coffee. "The girl is not biologically related to me. Lucas and Ava are. It is a simple matter of genetics. Zoe is our daughter in every way that matters." I countered. "Family is about love and commitment, not just DNA. And even if you privately held that outdated view, to announce it publicly at her birthday party, while giving expensive gifts to her cousins, was deliberately hurtful." Eleanor's expression hardened. "Children today are coddled too much. In my day, we learned to accept reality without all this emotional hand-holding." "This is not about coddling," I said, my voice still controlled despite my rising anger. "This is about basic respect and kindness, which you have consistently failed to show Zoe. Perhaps if you had raised her differently, she would not be so sensitive." Eleanor sniffed. "Though I suppose given her unknown background, certain tendencies are to be expected." I took a deep breath, counting silently to 5 before responding. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Eleanor leaned forward, apparently pleased to have provoked a reaction. "Let us be honest, Amanda. I never thought James should have married you to begin with. You come from a completely different social background than our family. And then to adopt a child of unknown origin instead of continuing to try for a biological child. Well, it was not what I would have advised." The mask had finally dropped completely. I stared at her momentarily, speechless at the naked prejudice in her words. Unknown origin. Zoe's adoption was fully documented and legal. We know her birth mother's medical history and background. Those other children have proper breeding. Eleanor continued, warming to her topic now that she had an audience. "Good stock on both sides. Thomas married appropriately, and their children reflect that good judgment." It was as if a fog had lifted, revealing the full extent of Eleanor's classist, prejudiced worldview. All the subtle digs, the coincidental oversights, the lavish praise for the twins, contrasted with criticism for Zoe, suddenly made perfect sense. This was not just about adoption, but about Eleanor's perception of social class and appropriate family connections. "Your granddaughter is a kind, creative, intelligent person," I said, my voice now steely with controlled anger. "The fact that you cannot see her value because you are fixated on some outdated notion of breeding says everything about your character and nothing about hers." Eleanor's mouth tightened into a thin line. "I see James has failed to teach you proper respect for your elders. But then, given your background, perhaps that is to be expected." My background? I repeated. You mean my father being a firefighter and my mother a nurse? The people who taught me that character matters more than social status. Who raised me to judge people by their actions, not their pedigree. Precisely, Eleanor sniffed. Perfectly respectable, I am sure, but hardly the sort of family James was raised to associate with. And now you are raising Zoe with the same common values. I took a moment to gather myself, recognizing that Eleanor was trying to provoke an emotional outburst that would allow her to dismiss my concerns. Eleanor, I said, finally, I am going to ask you directly. Will you apologize to Zoe for what you said at the party and commit to treating her with the same respect and affection you show Lucas and Ava? Eleanor's response was immediate and unapologetic. I have nothing to apologize for. The truth may be uncomfortable, but that does not make it any less true. The girl is not my blood relative, and I am under no obligation to pretend otherwise. I nodded slowly, having received the answer I expected, but still hoped against. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what came next. In that case, I need you to pack your things and leave our home. You have 24 hours. Eleanor's eyes widened in genuine shock. Excuse me. You have 24 hours to pack your belongings and find other accommodations. I repeated my voice, calm but firm. This is not negotiable. This is James's house, too, she sputtered. You cannot make this decision alone. James and I have already discussed this. I informed her. He agrees that your presence is harmful to Zoe and that you need to leave. This is absurd. Where am I supposed to go on such short notice? You have options. I said Thomas has a guest room. Or you could use some of that money you spent on iPhones to get a hotel until you find an apartment. The choice is yours. But either way, you will not be living here after tomorrow morning. Eleanor's face flushed with anger. You cannot throw me out. I am an elderly woman. You are a 67-year-old woman in excellent health who has been taking advantage of our hospitality while secretly hoarding money and emotionally abusing our daughter. I corrected her. And yes, I absolutely can ask you to leave my home under those circumstances. Eleanor stood up abruptly. James will hear about this, she threatened, reaching for her phone. Yes, he will. I agreed calmly. In fact, he is expecting your call. Eleanor immediately called James at school, her voice carrying through the kitchen as she gave her version of events. Your wife has lost her mind, threatening to throw me out on the street after everything I have done for this family. I continued calmly sipping my coffee, mentally preparing for the next phase of the confrontation. 20 minutes later, James walked through the front door, having left school early to address the situation. Eleanor rushed to him, relief evident on her face. Thank goodness you are here, she said. Amanda has been making ridiculous demands and threats. She seems to think she can evict me from your home with just 24 hours' notice. James looked from his mother to me, his expression serious. Let us all sit down and talk this through, he suggested, leading us to the living room. Once seated, he turned to Eleanor. Mom Amanda told me about your conversation. Is it true that you said Zoe is not really family because she is adopted? I merely stated the obvious, Eleanor defended. The girl is not my biological grandchild. I cannot be expected to feel the same connection to her as I do to Lucas and Ava. And did you also say that Amanda comes from the wrong social background and that Zoe has unknown origins and lacks proper breeding? James continued, his voice hardening. Eleanor hesitated, perhaps realizing how her words sounded when repeated back to her. I might have expressed some concerns about maintaining certain family standards, she hedged. Every grandmother wants the best for her family line. James shook his head slowly. The best for our family would be having a grandmother who loves all her grandchildren equally and does not rank their worth based on biology or perceived social status. Eleanor's eyes filled with strategic tears. You are taking everything out of context, she whimpered. I am an old woman who occasionally speaks too directly. Surely you would not throw your own mother out over a misunderstanding. This is not a misunderstanding, James said firmly. This is a pattern of behavior that has been hurting Zoe for years. As her father, it is my job to protect her, even if that means making difficult decisions about family relationships. Seeing that her manipulation was not working on James, Ella Laner switched tactics and called Thomas, presenting herself as the victim of an unreasonable daughter-in-law. Within an hour, Thomas and Heather had arrived to mediate the situation, and our living room became the setting for a tense family summit. "Let me get this straight," Thomas said after hearing both sides. "You are kicking Mom out because she bought phones for my kids, but not for Zoe." "No," I clarified. "We are asking Eleanor to leave because she publicly humiliated Zoe by announcing she is not really family because she is adopted and has continued to make hurtful comments that undermine Zoe's sense of belonging and self-worth." Thomas looked uncomfortable, glancing at his mother. "Mom, did you really say that?" "I might have expressed myself poorly," Eleanor admitted, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "But I never meant to hurt anyone. You know how much I love all my grandchildren." "Actually, that is the problem," James interjected. "You do not love all your grandchildren. You consistently favor Lucas and Ava while treating Zoe as an afterthought at best and an interloper at worst." Heather, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "Eleanor, I have noticed it too," she said quietly. "The way you talk about the kids is very different. You praise everything Lucas and Ava do, but you rarely acknowledge Zoe's achievements." Thomas looked surprised at his wife's intervention, but Eleanor was indignant. "So now everyone is ganging up on me. After everything I have done for this family." "What exactly have you done?" Mom, James asked. "You have lived rent-free in our home for 2 years, contributed minimally to household expenses, claiming financial hardship, all while apparently having enough savings to spend thousands on gifts for the twins." The conversation continued in circles, with Eleanor alternating between defensive justifications and tearful appeals to family loyalty. Thomas initially tried to defend his mother, but gradually came to understand the gravity of the situation as more details emerged. "I did not know about any of this." He admitted the things Mom says when we are not around. "It is not okay." After nearly 2 hours of discussion, Thomas offered a compromise. "Mom can stay with us temporarily while she looks for her own place." He suggested our guest room is available and it would give everyone some space to cool down. Eleanor latched onto this option immediately. "Yes, that would be best. I can stay with Thomas and Heather until this blows over and Amanda comes to her senses." "This is not about coming to my senses," I stated firmly. "This is a permanent boundary. Eleanor is welcome to visit our home in the future if she demonstrates genuine change and offers a sincere apology to Zoe, but she will not be living with us again." Eleanor scoffed. "Fine, I will apologize if that is what it takes to stay." "No," James said, surprising everyone with his firmness. "A forced apology under duress is meaningless. This is not about saying the right words to get what you want. This is about genuinely recognizing that your behavior has been harmful and making real changes." By late afternoon, practical arrangements were being discussed. Thomas would help Eleanor pack and move her belongings. The following day, Eleanor would stay with Thomas and Heather while looking for an independent living situation. James made it clear that financial support from us would be minimal going forward given Eleanor's apparent ability to make significant purchases on her own. As Thomas, Heather, and Eleanor prepared to leave, Zoe returned home from school, stopping short in the doorway at the sight of the family gathering. Confusion crossed her face, followed by weariness as she noticed Eleanor's tear-stained cheeks. "What is going on?" she asked, looking to James and me for explanation. I gestured for her to join us in the living room, and James and I explained the situation privately while Thomas kept Eleanor and Heather occupied in the kitchen. "Grandma is going to be moving out," James told her gently. "She is going to stay with Uncle Thomas and Aunt Heather for a while." "Because of what happened at the party?" Zoe asked, her voice small. "Because of me?" "No, sweetheart," I said firmly. "Not because of you. Because of Grandma's choices and behavior. Adults are responsible for their own actions and the consequences that follow." Zoe processed this information silently, emotions playing across her face. "Is she mad at me?" "Grandma is upset about the situation," James explained carefully. "But none of this is your fault. We want our home to be a place where everyone feels loved and respected. And unfortunately, Grandma has not been treating you with the respect you deserve." Later that evening, as Eleanor made a show of packing essential items for her night at Thomas's house, Making as much noise as possible and sighing dramatically, I decided to take Zoe out for a while. "Let us go shopping for those art supplies you wanted," I suggested, wanting to shield her from Eleanor's theatrical display of victimhood. At the art supply store, I let Zoe choose whatever she wanted, from professional colored pencils to high-quality sketching paper. As we sat at an ice cream shop afterward, I took the opportunity to reinforce some important truths. "You know that family is not about blood, right?" I said, watching her methodically arrange her ice cream toppings. "It is about love and commitment and showing up for each other every day." Zoe nodded slowly. "I know it just hurts that Grandma does not see it that way. Some people, especially from older generations, have very rigid ideas about what makes a family," I explained. "But those ideas are outdated and frankly wrong. You are our daughter in every way that matters, and nothing anyone says can change that." Zoe was quiet for a moment, stirring her ice cream thoughtfully. "Do you think Grandma will ever change her mind about me?" I considered my answer carefully, wanting to be honest without crushing her hope entirely. "I do not know, sweetheart. People can change if they want to, but they have to recognize there is a problem first. What I do know is that we are not going to let anyone make you feel less valued or less loved, even if that person is family." As we drove home, Zoe seemed lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted. The process of healing was just beginning, but this first step, removing the source of ongoing hurt from our daily lives, already seemed to be having a positive effect. The next morning, tension hung in the air as Eleanor prepared for her final departure. Thomas arrived at 9 o'clock to help with her remaining belongings, bringing his SUV to transport her numerous boxes and suitcases. James had taken the day off work to oversee the process and provide moral support for Zoe, who remained subdued, but appeared more relaxed than she had in weeks. Breakfast was a stilted affair, with Eleanor picking at her food and making pointed comments about being cast out and abandonment in old age. James remained firm but respectful, refusing to engage with her attempts to trigger guilt. Zoe ate quickly and excused herself to get ready for school, clearly wanting to avoid a difficult goodbye. Before leaving, Zoe hesitantly approached her grandmother in the hallway. Despite everything, she was attempting to be the bigger person, a gesture that filled me with pride. "Goodbye, Grandma," she said softly. "I hope you will be comfortable at Uncle Thomas's house." Eleanor's response was cool, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Goodbye, Zoe," she said with no term of endearment, no embrace, no sign of remorse. Even in this final moment, she could not bring herself to show warmth to the child she had hurt so deeply. Zoe's shoulders drooped slightly, but she lifted her chin and walked out the door to catch her bus dignity intact. James had a final conversation with his mother in the privacy of the guest room that had been her home for 2 years. I did not overhear their exchange, but when he emerged, his eyes were red-rimmed, but his posture was resolute. "She still does not really get it," he told me quietly. "She sees herself as the victim in all this, but I made it clear that our priority has to be Zoe, and that any future relationship depends on her ability to respect our daughter." At 11 o'clock, Thomas closed the trunk of his SUV on the last of Eleanor's possessions. There were awkward handshakes and stiff hugs, promises to talk soon that everyone knew would be difficult to fulfill, at least initially. And then Eleanor was in the passenger seat, face set in an expression of martyred suffering, and Thomas was driving away, the car disappearing around the corner of our street. James, standing beside me on the porch, let out a long breath. "I never imagined it would come to this," he admitted, having to choose between my mother and my daughter. I squeezed his hand. "You did not choose between them. Your mother forced that choice through her own actions. You simply protected Zoe, which is exactly what a good father should do." As we returned inside, the house felt different immediately. It was as if a heaviness had lifted, an invisible cloud of tension dissipating now that its source had departed. I realized how much energy we had all been expending navigating around Eleanor's moods and prejudices. How careful we had become in our own home to avoid triggering her disapproval. That evening, we had our first dinner as just the 3 of us in 2 years. No one commented on the empty chair, but conversation flowed more easily. Laughter returned to our table, and Zoe volunteered information about her day without being prompted, a small but significant change. After dinner, James sat with Zoe on the couch, his arm around her shoulders. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Seriously. I should have recognized what was happening sooner. I should have protected you better." Zoe leaned against him. "It is okay, Dad. Grandma is your mom. It is complicated." "Being complicated does not excuse hurting someone you love," James replied. "I want you to know that you are the most important person in the world to your mom and me. We chose you. We wanted you. And nothing, absolutely nothing, makes you any less our daughter than if you had grown in your mom's belly." That weekend, we made a point of doing something special together as a family. We drove to the coast, spent the day building sand castles and collecting shells, and had dinner at a small seafood restaurant overlooking the ocean. It was nothing extravagant, but it was a deliberate investment in reconnecting, in rebuilding the sense of security and belonging that had been damaged. Over the following weeks, we learned that Eleanor had moved into Thomas and Heather's guest room, a situation that was already causing some strain. Thomas called James occasionally, sometimes to vent about their mother's difficult behavior, sometimes to report small improvements in her attitude. Heather had apparently had several frank conversations with Eleanor about her treatment of Zoe, which Eleanor received with varying degrees of defensiveness. For our part, we maintained limited contact with clear boundaries. James would speak to his mother on the phone once a week, keeping conversations brief and steering away from contentious topics. Zoe was not asked to participate in these calls, though the door was left open for her to do so if she ever wanted to. I spoke to Eleanor only when absolutely necessary, maintaining civil but distant relations. We began family therapy sessions to help process the experience, particularly for Zoe. Our therapist, Dr. Martinez, helped us understand the dynamics that had allowed the situation to develop and provided tools for healing. "What happened was a form of emotional abuse," she explained in one session. "It is important to name it as such, not to demonize Eleanor, but to validate Zoe's experience and ensure it is addressed properly." Zoe's recovery was gradual but steady. The school counselor reported improvement in her engagement with classes and peers. She began sharing her artwork again, her creativity flowing more freely now that she was not constantly bracing for criticism or dismissal. Small signs of her returning confidence appeared, speaking up more at dinner, inviting friends over, suggesting family activities. About a month after Eleanor's departure, we repainted Zoe's room, transforming it from the pale yellow of her childhood to a cool teal that reflected her emerging teenage aesthetic. It was a symbolic fresh start, a reclaiming of space, both physical and emotional. 6 months later, Zoe's art teacher selected her painting for the district-wide student exhibition. The piece, a striking watercolor depicting a young girl standing at a crossroads with paths stretching toward different horizons, showed remarkable technical skill and emotional depth for a 13-year-old. The artist's statement accompanying it read, "Sometimes we have to choose which path to take in life. The hardest choices often lead to the most beautiful destinations." Eleanor did not attend the exhibition, though Thomas, Heather, and the twins did, making an effort to support Zoe in a way they had not before. Perhaps seeing their grandmother's behavior through new eyes had shifted something in their understanding as well. The twins were surprisingly engaged, asking Zoe questions about her techniques and inspiration. Small steps toward a different kind of cousin relationship, one not defined by Eleanor's influence. As I watched Zoe confidently explaining her artwork to attendees, her face animated with passion for her creation, I reflected on the difficult journey we had navigated. The pain had been real, the confrontations uncomfortable, the family bonds strained. But in protecting Zoe, in standing firm against the subtle and not so subtle undermining of her worth, we had ultimately created space for her to flourish. "I know my worth now," Zoe told me one evening as we looked through her sketchbook together. "I know that family is about who loves you, not whose DNA you share." The wisdom in her young voice brought tears to my eyes. Through all the hurt, she had emerged with a stronger sense of self and a deeper understanding of what truly matters in relationships. Eleanor's rejection, painful as it was, had ultimately led to powerful lessons about standing up for oneself and recognizing toxic behavior, even when it comes from family. Our story does not have a neat fairy tale ending. Eleanor has not had a dramatic change of heart or suddenly recognized the error of her ways. Family gatherings remain complicated. Relationships are still being rebuilt and redefined. But our home is now a sanctuary again, a place of acceptance and love where Zoe can grow into herself without constantly seeking approval from someone incapable of giving it freely. The journey taught us all that protecting our children sometimes means making painful choices, setting difficult boundaries, and weathering the disapproval of others. It taught us that family is defined by love and commitment, not by biology or social expectations. Most importantly, it taught Zoe that she is worthy of respect and belonging exactly as she is. Have you ever had to stand up to a family member to protect someone you love? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more about navigating complex family dynamics and standing up for what is right. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we are born into.